He had one unread voicemail. He'd had it for 5 years. He never deleted it. He never played it. And on the night everything finally broke open, that 43 seconds of silence was the only thing standing between him and the truth he'd been running from his entire life. Ethan Walker was 74 years old. He had a corner office on the 14th floor of a building he'd helped build. He had a house in Newton with 4 bedrooms and a yard that strangers kept perfect because he was never home long enough to touch it himself. He had a name that meant something in certain rooms in Boston. He had a LinkedIn profile with 600 connections and a retirement account his financial advisor called impressive. He had a daughter who didn't know him. He had a brother he'd let die without calling back. And he had 43 seconds of voicemail sitting on his phone like a sealed confession, his brother's last words, untouched, unheard, waiting in the dark of his pocket every single day for 5 years, while Ethan Walker kept moving, kept working, kept telling himself there would be time later to feel the things he wasn't ready to feel. There is no later. That's the thing nobody tells you. That's the thing you have to learn yourself, usually when it's almost too late, usually flat on your back in a hospital room with wires on your chest and your daughter crying in the chair beside you, usually at the 11th hour. The morning of January 14th began the way every morning of Ethan's life began. Alarm at 5:45, coffee untouched on the counter, tie half knotted in the bathroom mirror, phone already buzzing before 6. He moved through his kitchen the way a man moves through a place he's never truly lived in, efficiently, automatically, without seeing it. The winter sun was coming through the window, pale and cold, laying a long stripe of gold across the kitchen floor. He stepped over it without noticing. He'd been stepping over beautiful things his entire life. Claire called at 6:58. He watched her name light up the screen. He thought, I'll call her after the meeting. He pressed decline and walked out the door. He always said, after the meeting, after the quarter, after things settle down. Things never settled down. The boardroom on the 14th floor was cold the way those rooms always are. Sharp air, sharp light, sharp suits, sharp people pretending they aren't afraid of each other. Ethan was mid-sentence, something about projections, something about the second quarter, when it hit him. First in his jaw, a pressure he didn't recognize. Then heat spreading across his chest like something spilling. Then his left arm went strange and heavy, and the room tilted, and the last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the face of a junior analyst across the table, young and pale and frozen, mouth open, already reaching for his phone. Then nothing. He woke up to beeping, white ceiling, cold fluorescent light, the smell of antiseptic, and somewhere nearby, flowers. Someone had brought flowers and set them on the windsill. He tried to move his right arm and felt the pull of the IV line. His chest felt like something enormous had been placed on it and left there. He lay still, blinking, assembling the world piece by piece. Then he heard it, crying, soft and broken from the chair beside his bed. Claire, 41 years old, hands pressed over her mouth, shoulders moving, tears she wasn't trying to hide anymore. He thought she was afraid he was going to die. He reached for her hand. She grabbed it and held it hard and pressed her face against it and kept crying. And he lay there thinking, it's okay, I'm here, I'm alive, it's okay. He was wrong about why she was crying. He didn't find out the truth for 3 more days. It was past midnight. He was supposed to be asleep. Claire was in the hallway, door half open, voice low, talking to her husband on the phone. Ethan lay in the dark and listened to every word without meaning to, and then couldn't stop. I just sat there looking at him, she whispered, and I kept thinking, I don't know him. I don't actually know my own father. 41 years, and I don't know what he's afraid of. I don't know what makes him happy. I don't know if he's ever been happy. A pause. Her voice dropped lower, and that scared me more than him almost dying. That's the part I can't stop thinking about. The beeping of the heart monitor filled the room. Ethan Walker stared at the ceiling and did not move. 40 years of believing that providing was the same as loving, that showing up for the office was the same as showing up for your life. 40 years of later and after this and once things settle. 40 years of stepping over gold light on the kitchen floor because there was always somewhere more important to be. His daughter didn't know him, and he understood, lying there in the dark, that he had nobody to blame for that but himself. The hospital kept him 11 days of white walls and slow time and nowhere to go and nothing to do but think. For a man who had spent 50 years running from silence, it was the most brutal experience of his life. More brutal than the heart attack, more brutal than anything he'd faced in any boardroom or any negotiation or any crisis his career had ever thrown at him.
He thought about Daniel. He thought about Daniel every single hour of every one of those 11 days. They had grown up together in a small apartment in Dorchester, 2 boys in 1 bedroom, 1 pair of good shoes between them, a father who worked nights and a mother who loved them so hard it was almost painful to remember. They had been close in the way that only shared poverty and shared laughter can make 2 people close. The kind of close that feels permanent. The kind that feels like it doesn't need tending because it will always be there. That's the lie closeness tells you, that it doesn't need tending. Slowly, over decades, the distance had grown. Not in any single moment, that's never how it happens. It happens in the small ones. A call rescheduled, a visit postponed, a birthday text instead of a phone call. A month that passes, and then another, and then you look up and 8 months have gone by and neither of you noticed because you were both so busy living lives that had slowly, quietly drifted apart, like 2 boats whose rope nobody thought to check. 8 months of silence, and then that Tuesday. Daniel had called at 2:14 in the afternoon. Ethan had been in a conference call. He'd seen the name, he'd felt a small, warm thing in his chest, relief maybe, or love, the kind that doesn't announce itself, and then he'd pressed decline and kept talking about numbers with men he can barely remember now. He thought, I'll call him tonight. Tonight came and went. He forgot. 2 days later, a wet street in Chicago, a driver who ran a red light. Daniel was gone before anyone could reach him. 69 years old, a whole life, a whole person, gone. Ethan had flown to Chicago for the funeral. He'd worn a dark suit and accepted condolences and held it together with both hands the entire time, because holding it together was the only thing he knew how to do. He'd flown home Sunday night because he had a Monday meeting he told himself he couldn't miss. He'd sat in first class and stared at the window and thought about the voicemail notification he'd seen on his phone. Daniel had left one, 43 seconds, right before Ethan had declined the call, and he'd told himself he would listen to it when he was ready. He was never ready. 5 years passed. The voicemail sat there, 43 seconds of his brother's voice in the dark, waiting. In the hospital, in the slow hours of those 11 nights, Ethan finally admitted something to himself. He was afraid, not of death. He was afraid of 43 seconds, afraid of what his brother's voice might sound like after 5 years of silence, afraid of what it might say, afraid of what it might cost him to finally hear it.
But here is what he also understood. The voicemail wasn't going away, and neither was the silence. One of them he could do something about. Claire came every day. She brought coffee she knew he liked and a worn paperback she read in the chair while he slept. And when he was awake, they talked in a way they hadn't talked in years. The real kind, the kind with long pauses and true things and no one trying to fix anything. She told him about her marriage, about the loneliness she carried in it, about growing up in that Newton house and learning early that the man who lived there was somehow always unreachable, even when he was standing in the same room. She told him about the graduations and recitals and ordinary dinners that he'd attended in body, but not in spirit. Phone on the table, mind somewhere on the 14th floor, present the way a photograph is present. "I used to save things to tell you," she said one afternoon. Quiet, no anger in it, just truth, offered carefully, the way you offer something fragile. Funny things from school, things I was proud of, and by the time you were home I'd forgotten most of them, and the ones I remembered felt too small, like they wouldn't matter to you. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He didn't reach for the tools he'd spent a lifetime using: logic, redirection, the slight pivot that moves a difficult conversation toward safer ground. He just sat with what she'd said, let it land where it was supposed to land. "I never blamed you," she said. Her eyes were wet. "I just missed you. I kept missing you even when you were right there." There is no word in any language for what a man feels when his daughter says that. Ethan didn't try to find one. He reached over and took her hand in both of his and held it. She let him. They sat in the beeping silence of that room for a long time, and it was the most honest and important meeting he had attended in 40 years. He resigned the week he came home. They offered consulting arrangements, phased transitions, part-time roles, every graceful exit a man of his standing was supposed to want. He said no to all of it, politely, firmly, without explanation. He was done explaining himself to rooms. He wanted time, whatever time he had left, all of it. He gave himself 1 week at home before he did what he'd been unable to do for 5 years. He sat at the kitchen table, late morning, pale light coming through the window, coffee beside him, untouched, phone in both hands. He found the voicemail. He looked at the timer, 43 seconds. He pressed play. Static, a breath. Then Daniel's voice filled the kitchen, lower than Ethan's, rougher, carrying the South Boston sound they'd both started with, and that Daniel had never lost, not in 40 years in Chicago, not ever.
"Hey, it's me. I know you're probably in a meeting or something." A small laugh. Daniel's laugh. Ethan pressed one hand flat on the table to steady himself. I don't know. I was thinking about you today. I was thinking about when we were kids, you know? That winter Mom couldn't pay the heating bill, and we all slept in the kitchen because it was the warmest room. We thought it was an adventure. We made a tent out of blankets, and we thought we were camping. A pause. Ethan could hear Daniel breathing, could hear the faint sound of Chicago traffic in the background. "I just wanted to tell you I love you, man. That's all. That's the whole call. No reason. I just wanted you to know." Another small pause. "Call me back when you get a chance. Doesn't have to be tonight. Just sometime soon, yeah?" The message ended. 43 seconds. Ethan sat at that kitchen table and did not move for a very long time. Outside, something moved in the yard. A bird, maybe, landing on the bare branch of a tree. The refrigerator hummed. The house held completely still around him. He pressed his hands over his face. He cried the way he hadn't cried since he was 9 years old, and his father sat him down and told him that crying wasn't something men did, and he'd believed it with his whole heart for 65 years. Not the controlled, managed grief he'd performed at Daniel's funeral in the dark suit, not the dignified kind, the other kind, the kind that comes from somewhere below language, below thought, from the place where all the things you never said or did or felt had been waiting in the dark for years. He cried for Daniel, for a Tuesday afternoon he couldn't get back, for 43 seconds he'd waited 5 years to hear. He cried for Margaret, who had learned to stop waiting up, for Claire at the graduation dinner, watching him through the window in her cap and gown, for every ordinary evening he'd treated like an obstacle, for every gold stripe of light on the kitchen floor he'd stepped over without seeing. He cried until there was nothing left. And then the strange thing happened, the thing he hadn't expected. He felt lighter.
Not fixed, not healed, not absolved, just lighter. As if something he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was weight had finally been set down where he could look at it clearly. Grief is like that when you finally stop running from it. It doesn't disappear, it just becomes something you can carry honestly instead of something that carries you. He listened to the voicemail 2 more times, then saved it somewhere it would never accidentally be deleted. He would listen to it many more times in the years ahead, on hard mornings, on quiet evenings, on the anniversary of that Tuesday in October. It would never stop costing him something to hear it. He decided that was right. That was how it should be. Some things should always cost you something. Spring came, and he let it. He called Claire and said, "Take me somewhere you've always wanted to go." She laughed, startled, uncertain, like someone who'd stopped expecting good surprises. She said, "Ireland." Margaret's family were from County Clare. She'd always wanted to see it. They went in April, 2 full weeks. He left his laptop at home, he put his phone away every morning after breakfast and didn't pick it up again until evening, and most evenings he forgot. They walked along cliffs above an ocean that was gray and green and vast and wild and staggeringly indifferent and the most beautiful thing he'd ever stood beside. They ate in small pubs where nobody knew them. They got lost on roads that had no business being called roads and laughed about it, real laughter, the kind that comes up from somewhere genuine. One evening they sat on a stone wall above the Atlantic and watched the sun go down over the water. They didn't speak for a long time. The wind was cold and steady, and the light turned everything gold and then orange and then a deep, impossible red. Ethan sat with his daughter's shoulder against his and felt the wind on his face and thought about Daniel making a tent out of blankets in a cold kitchen in Dorchester, thinking it was an adventure. It had been an adventure, all of it. He just hadn't known how to see it. Before they flew home, he stopped at a small cemetery outside Ennis, where Margaret's grandmother was buried. He stood among the old gray stones in the late afternoon light and talked out loud to his wife for the first time since she'd been gone. He told her he was sorry for all the dinners she'd eaten alone. He told her she'd deserved more presence, more attention, more of him than she'd ever gotten. He told her Claire was extraordinary, and that was entirely her doing, not his, and she should know that he knew that. The wind moved through the long grass between the stones. He took it as forgiveness. He chose to. It seemed like the braver choice. He planted a maple tree in his backyard that summer. He couldn't have explained exactly why. It just felt necessary, something living, something that needed tending, something that would grow slowly and outlast him and be there long after he was gone. He watered it himself every morning, early, before the neighborhood woke up, in the soft light he'd spent 40 years sleeping through. He started noticing that light, really noticing it, the way it came through the kitchen window and made the countertops look warm, made the coffee steam look like something from a painting, made the ordinary kitchen of an ordinary morning feel like something worth being awake for. He wrote Claire a letter, a real one, on paper with a pen, because some things deserve more than a screen. He wrote it over 3 weeks and started over 5 times. He told her about the voicemail. He told her what Daniel's voice had sounded like after 5 years of silence. He told her what he'd realized in that hospital room in the middle of the night when he'd heard her words through the half-open door. He told her that she had been the most important thing in his life for 41 years, and that he had spent most of those years in other rooms, and that he was finished with other rooms, and that whatever time he had left was going to be spent where it should have always been spent, right there, close enough to hear her. She called him after she read it. She couldn't speak right away. He could hear her breathing, trying to find words. "Dad," she finally said, Just that one word, just his name in her voice, all of it in that one word. "I know," he said softly. "I know, sweetheart." He turned 75 in October. Small dinner, family, a few close friends, no speeches. He sat at the head of the table and looked at the faces around him, really looked, with the unhurried attention he'd spent a lifetime withholding, and felt something he had no adequate word for. Not pride, not accomplishment, something quieter, something that didn't announce itself or demand recognition, something that had apparently been available to him his whole life, and that he was only now, at 75, learning to receive. After dinner, they sat on the back porch, he and Claire, in the cool October dark. The maple had turned red, still small, still young, but unmistakably, stubbornly, beautifully alive. "Are you happy?" Claire asked. Her voice was soft. She wasn't testing him. She genuinely wanted to know. He sat with the question. He gave it the time it deserved.
"I think," he said slowly, watching the small red tree move in the dark, "that I spent my whole life confusing happiness with achievement, and I'm only just now learning what the real thing actually feels like." She leaned her head on his shoulder. He put his arm around her. Down the street, somewhere in the neighborhood, a door closed quietly. A dog barked once and went silent. The night settled around them like something gentle and forgiving. He thought about Daniel. He would always think about Daniel. That Tuesday, that red light on a wet Chicago street, those 43 seconds he'd almost never heard. He thought about the blanket tent in the cold kitchen, two boys who thought they were on an adventure, a mother stretching love and money both until they held. It had all been the adventure, every ordinary Tuesday of it. He breathed in the October air, cold and clean and real. He held it a moment. He had spent 52 years preparing to live. He was done preparing. The maple moved in the dark, small and red, and quietly, completely, unshakably alive. And so was he. If this story reached something inside you, if it made you think of someone you haven't called, a voice you've been missing, a conversation you keep putting off, stop this video right now and make that call. Not tonight, not this weekend, right now. Because Daniel called his brother on an ordinary Tuesday just to say, "I love you," and Ethan almost never got to hear it. Don't let that be your story. Share this with someone who needs it today. And if you're new here, welcome to the 11th Hour's Last Words. Subscribe, because these are the stories that remind us what we're really here for. This story speaks to one of the most painful and universal truths of human life, that we treat the people we love most as the ones we can always get to later. It carries particular resonance for older audiences who understand in their bones the irreversibility of time, who have their own unanswered calls, their own sealed voicemails, their own ordinary Tuesdays they would give everything to have back. The lesson is not about regret. It is about recognition, that the life you have been waiting to live is the one already happening around you, in the light on the kitchen floor, and the voice of your daughter, and the 43 seconds someone called just to say, "I love you," for no reason at all.